There are few, if any, movements in film history as widely influential and disruptive as the French New Wave. Somehow, it is no exaggeration to say a small handful of magazine writers changed the way the world viewed and made movies.
Whatever books that said this is how it had to be done, they burned them.
Lights, camera, action!
This is What is the French New Wave? Before we enter 1950s Paris, be sure to subscribe to StudioBinder and click the bell to stay up to date on all our videos. Now, commença. The French New Wave, or Nouvelle Vague, is a cinematic movement which rose to prominence in the 1950s in Paris, with its height largely considered to be from 1959 to 1963. While there is no one French New Wave style, it is most typically characterized by its groundbreaking filmmaking techniques. That marked a stark turn away from the classical filmmaking that defined the 30s and 40s in both the US and Europe. French New Wave director François Truffaut argued, "The New Wave is neither a movement nor a school nor a group. It's a quality." Film historian James Monaco, meanwhile, describes the New Wave as simply a new youthful spirit then making itself felt in French film. The French New Wave primarily arose out of the film criticism magazine Cahiers du Cinéma, which took a radical approach to analyzing cinema and famously embraced the idea of auteurism. Many New Wave auteurs began as writers for the publication, including Truffaut, Jean-Luc Godard, Éric Rohmer, Claude Chabrol, and Jacques Rivette. Some critics, as well as Godard himself, consider the New Wave to only consist of these 5 men. New Wave filmmakers were heavily influenced by Italian Neorealism, which prioritized unglamorous stories told in a docu-style, and classical Hollywood cinema, where the Cahiers du Cinéma writers saw filmmakers like Alfred Hitchcock and Howard Hawks as auteurs themselves. These two seemingly contradictory influences resulted in a radical new style that would speak to a younger generation of filmgoers, who, by the 1960s, were looking for entertainment outside of the mainstream. We'll look at why this movement was so resonant, as well as its other iterations on the left bank. But first, let's look at their groundbreaking filmmaking techniques.
Regarde, un appareil photo miniature!
The French New Wave was first and foremost a rebuke of the French studio system, or what was called the tradition of quality, which the Cahiers du Cinéma group saw as repetitive and stifling. And so New Wave films largely have two common through lines: an experimental and inventive approach, and a relatively low budget, since they were producing projects mostly outside of the studios. The experimentation on a budget would often take the form of cinéma vérité, a concurrent movement in the documentary genre, comprising fly-on-the-wall sequences captured with handheld mobile cameras. This handheld camera work created an improvisatory feel that infused an anarchic energy into the film. And it was made possible by the introduction of smaller, more mobile cameras that were developed during World War II. Monaco writes, "The phenomenon of the New Wave would still not have been possible were it not for the concurrent revolution of the technology of film. Fast film stocks, lightweight cameras, new lighting equipment, and the liberation from the Hollywood set that all this implied made the camera stylo a reality." In this verite vein, New Wave filmmakers would often utilize natural lighting, which further removed them from the artifice of studio films. It also allowed them to be more mobile, swinging the camera wherever the action took them, without having to worry about catching a light. The New Wave filmmakers would also typically prioritize real locations rather than build sets. This, of course, was a budget consideration, but also was in line with their goal to more realistically depict the world around them.
Puis ils marchèrent dans le noir jusqu'à la place Clichy, assurément une des plus belles de Paris le soir, avec sa lumière de charbon. Tout ceci ramenait Arthur et Odile à eux-mêmes, au présent, au passé, au futur fait d'aventure.
The experimentation on set carried over into the cutting room. New wave filmmakers largely eschewed the invisible editing approach of studio films, and instead opted for jarring cuts that often call attention to themselves. One of the most famous innovations to come out of the new wave was the jump cut, which Godard brought to popularity in Breathless.
J'aime une fille qui a une très jolie nuque, de très jolis seins, une très jolie voix, de très jolis poignets, un très joli front, de très jolis genoux.
This too came from budget limitations. Godard received the note to increase the pacing of scenes that were only covered in one long take, and so he simply cut through them. Pacing is another distinctive element of French New Wave films. New Wave directors would often move from scene to scene faster than studio films, adding to the energy that the roving cameras had laid the foundation for.
Est-ce que vous êtes heureux, monsieur?
Oh, me parlez pas tout ça.
Monsieur, s'il vous plaît, est-ce que vous êtes heureux?
Toujours, oui.
C'est vrai?
Mais oui.
Oh oui, oh, ben là, ça va.
For New Wave filmmakers, nothing was off the table in the editing room. They would break the 180-degree rule, experiment with sound, and play with avant-garde juxtapositions. While the French New Wave's filmmaking techniques have proved to be enormously influential, their staying power is also rooted in their distinct approach to narrative. Truffaut once said of New Wave filmmakers, "In comparison with American directors, I think we are all intellectuals."
Est-ce que tu penses à la mort quelquefois? Moi j'y pense sans arrêt.
Most French New Wave films can be characterized by their heady and existential narratives and themes.
Le présent est effrayant parce qu'il est irréversible, parce qu'il est de fer. Le temps est la substance dont je suis fait.
New Wave filmmakers were disinterested in spoon-feeding their audience and created films which instead challenged and often confounded viewers. Agnes Varda explains, "In my films, I always wanted to make people see deeply. I don't want to show things, but to give people the desire to see." This often meant deliberately departing from a conventional story arc with a tidy beginning, middle, and end. New Wave narratives are often meandering and unpredictable, creating an almost stream of consciousness feeling, where threads are abandoned and tangents are indulged. Éric Rohmer's La Collectionneuse, for example, has no conventional narrative thrust, simply following a group of characters on vacation. This lack of urgency builds on themes of ennui and aimlessness that are so common in New Wave films.
Nous sommes indifférents et c'est très bien. Ça n'empêche pas de vivre ensemble.
These structures are perfect for character studies. These characters are typically not traditional heroes and don't always make the right decisions. In real life, human beings don't typically move in a straight line. And so, New Wave narratives often follow whatever whim their protagonist feels. This approach allowed for the creation of complex and realistic characters.
Pourquoi est-ce qu'il faut toujours parler? Moi, je trouve que très souvent, on devrait se taire, vivre en silence. Plus on parle, plus le monde ne veut rien dire.
Often, these protagonists were women, whose free-spirited nature would come up against the rigid societal expectations imposed upon them.
Émile, je pense à quelque chose tout à coup.
Tu m'emmerdes!
Cleo from 5 to 7 follows its protagonist for a single day as she waits for test results.
Alors, ça ne va pas, la petite dame?
Elle se tracasse.
Elle se fait une montagne
pour un examen médical.
There is no singular conflict, allowing interactions to happen seemingly naturally and letting us see multiple different sides of Cleo.
Il me semble que je n'ai plus peur. Et il me semble que je suis heureuse.
New Wave themes, too, were groundbreaking for their time. These films are often steeped in existentialism, depicting characters who are searching for larger meaning.
Probablement que je ne suis pas un véritable artiste, mais j'ai besoin qu'on le croie pour essayer de le devenir. Je ne demande tout de même pas grand-chose, nom de Dieu.
And often failing to find it.
Qu'est-ce que vous allez faire?
Et vous?
Moi, j'hésite entre le nord et le sud.
This detachment lent itself to heavily ironic tones, where the absurdity of the day-to-day is portrayed in high relief.
C'est devenu un monstre innommable de vulgarité. De ma vie, je ne veux vous revoir. Adieu à jamais adieu.
This irony would often come through parodied or subverted references to other films. Cahiers du Cinéma writers were film fans first, and so they would often quote other genres, like noir, for their own ends. The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, for example, uses the colourful trappings of big Hollywood musical productions, but contrasts it with darker subject matter.
Ce matin, j'ai reçu cette feuille de route et je dois partir pour 2 ans. Alors le mariage, on en reparlera plus tard. Avec ce qui se passe en Algérie en ce moment, je ne reviendrai pas d'ici longtemps.
This lets director Jacques Demy emphasize the damage the Algerian war has wrought.
Moi qui serais morte pour lui, pourquoi ne suis-je pas morte?
Some new wave directors would take this modernist approach even further, using metatextual techniques like having characters address the camera.
Si vous n'aimez pas la mer, si vous n'aimez pas la montagne, si vous n'aimez pas la ville, allez vous faire foutre.
Or even discuss their own roles within the story.
Mardi, je voulais m'acheter un tourne-disque. Je n'ai même pas pu, parce qu'il s'achète des livres. Au fond, je m'en fiche. Mais ça, il ne le comprend même pas.
This self-reflexivity would allow filmmakers to comment on the art of filmmaking itself, as well as, in Godard's case especially, make radical political statements.
US go home! US go home! Go home! Go home! Go home!
For all its binding factors, it should be noted that the French New Wave was far from a homogeneous crusade. The Cahiers du Cinéma group was only one half of the movement. There was also the left bank. On the other side of the River Seine in Paris, another burgeoning filmmaking collective was pushing the language of cinema forward. The left bank consisted of filmmakers like Agnes Varda, Chris Marker, Alain Resnais, and Jacques Demy, and had enough modernist similarities with the Cahiers du Cinéma approach to also be considered part of the French New Wave. But there were nearly as many differences between the two factions, and Godard stated that the left bank should be considered its own movement. Film historians Kristin Thompson and David Bordwell write that the left bank filmmakers were largely older and less movie-mad than the Cahiers crew. They tended to see cinema as akin to other arts. The Left Bank members, for the most part, had backgrounds in other art forms. Agnes Varda, for example, worked as a photographer before she turned to film, while Chris Marker was a journalist and writer. These backgrounds and viewpoints often made Left Bank films feel much more literary, and occasionally even veering into film essays. Filmmaker Claire Clouseau noted, "The filmmakers of the Left Bank are inspired by artistic eclecticism. As creators, they are interested in the flow of mental processes rather than cinephilic fanaticism. It is not theoretical criticism which draws them to the cinema, but an interest in filmic writing and the relations this might have with literary production." The Left Bank were also seen as much more overtly political, commenting directly on issues such as war, racism, and the patriarchy. As a result, Left Bank cinema often was even more dense and avant-garde than the French New Wave's other half, and therefore typically had less commercial success. But to this day, both factions of the French New Wave continue to have a massive impact. It is perhaps an understatement to say that the French New Wave prompted a sea change in filmmaking everywhere. Martin Scorsese notes, "The New Wave has influenced all filmmakers who have worked since, whether they saw the films or not. It submerged cinema like a tidal wave. The Nouvelle Vague filmmakers and their films paved a new path for cinema, encouraging experimentation in form and profundity in themes." Filmmaker Mike Leigh describes seeing Breathless for the first time in theaters. Free-spirited location filming, spontaneous believable acting, wayward unconnected quirky moments. Here was a feast of revelatory challenges to one's ideas about cinema, pure anarchic bliss. In the 1970s, the New Wave was embraced by Hollywood's new generation and could be seen in the works of Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, and John Cassavetes, who used the New Wave's filmmaking techniques and philosophy, as well as in Bonnie and Clyde, which effectively started the New Hollywood movement. In the 70s and into the 80s, black filmmakers like Charles Burnett expanded upon New Wave practices to create an underground cinema movement now called the LA Rebellion. In the 1990s, the French New Wave's stripped-back aesthetics were pushed further by Lars von Trier and Thomas Vinterberg with the founding of their Dogma 95 movement. And the genre homage of Godard in particular were picked up by Quentin Tarantino.
Godard was so influential to me at the beginning of my aesthetic as a director. His kind of like lack of complete any type of film style, just this wanting to make movies for love of it. Godard is the one who taught me the fun and the freedom and the joy of breaking rules, and just playing around with the entire medium.
In the 2000s, the ironic and improvisatory nature of the French New Wave helped inspire mumblecore filmmakers. The influence of the French New Wave today can be seen in the biggest blockbuster to the smallest indie. And yet, remarkably, the films of the movement remain as fresh as ever. The French New Wave is a testament to doing a lot with a little. Get started on your own movie with StudioBinder softwares for screenwriting, storyboarding, shot listing, and much more. Au revoir. Don't be afraid to experiment.
Au revoir. Au revoir.